Okay, so sorry for the delay, but welcome to episode 2 of the Code Club series where I'm going to be catching you guys up on what to do. So in the last one we ran this, it was just a basic example of how to set up your program, how to make strings, doubles, and integers. And so today we're going to be working on something new. This is what we can do to manipulate those variables. So other than adding or changing them very slightly, we're going to be using what's called an if, else, or else if expression. And these three different expressions are used for a lot of different applications in programming. So I'll just write at the top, if, else, else if. So let's say we have a variable. Let's say int x is equal to 5. So if, and then so you put some parentheses, if x, and then the important difference here is equal to, is two equal signs. So equal sets it equal to something, right? So one equal sign sets it equal to something. So here it's int x is equal to 5, right? But here it's int x is equal to 5. So what this is basically saying is x equal to 5, and this is saying x is equal to 5. And so you put some parentheses and it moves it up to a new level. And let's just do system. A little trick here is if you do this, it's control space. You type sys out and then press control space and it'll autocorrect to the full system.out.println line. Say x equals 5. If we run this, what's going to happen is x is equal to 5, so the computer will print out x equals 5. Now, if we set x here equal to 6 instead, the code actually won't get run. And that's because the computer's checking. It sets x equal to 6 and it's saying, does x have this value? And since x doesn't have this value, it just skips. And it executes whatever code is down here. But because there's no code down here, it just ends. So what if we wanted to, right? So let's say if x equal to 5, how about else sys out x is not equal to 5. And then it would run this instead. So when you have an if-else statement, it's going to, if it doesn't prove the if statement true, it's not going to run, or if it doesn't prove the if statement true, it's going to run the else statement. If it proves the if statement true, it's going to skip the else statement. So if x equaled 5, it wouldn't print out x is not equal to 5. It would just print out x equals 5 and then move on down here. Now, what if you had multiple conditions that you wanted to check for? So let's say is it greater? All right. Well, we'll do like this. Well, let's say you wanted to check if x was 6, right? So then you wouldn't do a new if, you would do else if x is equal to 6. And so what's going to happen here is it's going to check first if x equals 5, and if it does, then it's going to skip the rest of this, right? So that's what's going to happen when I run it right now. None of these get printed. But if I set x equal to 6, it's going to check, is it equal to 5? No. Okay. Is it equal to 6? Yes. And then it skips this. So that's why it only prints this. If I set it to like 3 or something that isn't either of these, it's going to say no, no, and then it'll automatically default to this, x is not equal to 5. In this case, I would say 5 or 6. And what's basically happening is the statement within this parentheses is being evaluated by the computer, and it either comes down to true or false, right? Two different values. And these things are values that actually exist in Java, right? So if I said if true, that means that this if statement would always run. And that's why I'm getting sort of an error here. This is called dead code. So if this always runs, this is never going to run. These else if and else statements is never going to run if the if statement is always true. So that's why you need to have it be what's called a conditional. So there's different ways of doing these. So true or false, there's actually a variable made for them. It's called Boolean. I know it sounds weird, but let's just move along with it. Boolean B is equal to true. If I could type. Boolean B is equal to true. Or we could do Boolean, or well, I guess we wouldn't have to initialize it, so we just be B equals false. So if we put B in one of the, in this again, right, if we put B here, if B, then it's basically equivalent to writing if true. It would still never execute any of the others unless I change the value of B before I call it. Now there's also different ways of saying, of doing, you can do what's called, you can do basically math to Booleans. So you've got true, but if you put not, which is the exclamation mark point in front of something, it would, it's not whatever. So the way to do not equal to, if x is not equal to 5, right? And that's what's basically happening in our else statement. If x is not equal to 5, then we'll say x doesn't equal 5. And so anything other than 5 will evaluate there. And what that means is that if you want to look for anything that's not a specific number, you would use that. So x doesn't equal 5. 3, if I put 4, or if I put 6, even if I put 6 here, because the first line evaluates true, it's going to skip that, and it's going to skip printing out this, even though it does equal 6. So you can do more with just that as well. Let's say you wanted to do more logic like this. So you can put two different arithmetic statements in there. You can put two different things you need to evaluate, and there's two different types of statements, right? They're called or and statements, right? And or. So and requires both things to be true. So true and true equals true. But if you have true and false, it still equals false. And the opposite of this is or, right? So or is false or false equals false. But or is true or false is equal to true. That's the important differentiation between them, and you might not understand that, but the symbols for and or is, this is and this is or. So and is pretty simple, it's ampersands, and then or, this is the absolute value signs. On your keyboard it's located directly above the enter key. It's a backslash, but the shift version of it is the difference. So let's say if x is equal to 5 and let's give ourselves another variable here to work with, and I is equal to 2, right? What that's going to basically check for is that both x has to equal 5 and I has to equal 2 for this to get printed. And here, why don't we do if x is equal to 6 or I is equal to 2. And so let's change x to be 7 so I can show you. So this one's not going to execute, even though one of the conditions is true, because x isn't equal to 5. But the second one is going to execute, because even though x doesn't equal 6, right, so this would be misleading here. So I'll rename this one condition 2. So there's condition 2. Condition 2 is going to execute because I is equal to 2. And because we have an or statement here, it's going to choose that true statement and use it. Now, what if I did this? If I put parentheses around that, and I put an exclamation point in front, it's not going to execute, because if the I is equal to 2 evaluates to true, not true is false. So it's going to be false and false, and then we get condition 3. And I'll just call this one condition 1. So you can do some pretty funky stuff with this, and you can have as many else ifs as you want. So if I want another else if, then I could do that. So else if x is equal to 5, or I is equal to, or I is not equal to 3, right? Let's say that. Right? Then that means all that has to happen is I isn't equal to 3, or x is equal to 5. It's kind of confusing, and you probably won't use all of that too much, but there's a chance you will. So let me get back to the basics here. See, notice you don't put parentheses on an else statement because it has no condition to check. It's just anything that's not executed, that doesn't execute the if. Another thing you can do is you can have less than or greater than signs. So less than is equal to this, less than or equal to is equal to this, and it's the same sort of thing here. Greater than is equal to the opposite. Greater than or equal, it's the same idea. And so those are important things. So like, let's say if I wanted to check if x was positive. If x is positive, it's if x is greater than 0. Or and so that would input if x is greater than 0. Let's say I wanted to check if x was greater than or equal to 5. I would just say greater than or equal to 5. It's that simple. So we'll keep it as positive for now. And it's important to know, it would be good use of if and else if. So else if x is less than 0. Now, if both of these evaluated to false, what does that mean? That means else is always going to be called if the x is equal to 0. So I can do that. And I say here x equals 0, or x is equal to 0. And, whoops. And so if I set here x equal to 0, it's going to run that because it's going to see x isn't greater than 0, x isn't less than 0, so x must be 0. You get that here. Now here we're going to go into more advanced stuff. This is what's going to be called nested if statements. So a nested statement is one that exists within another. So let's say if we wanted to check if x was greater than 0, right? And then we would also check if x is less than 10. So the way you do that is simply another if. So if x is less than 10. So that means that x exists between somewhere between 1 and 10. And so we'll do that. X is greater than 1, or x is between 1 and 10, and we'll make 10 inclusive. That's what it's called when you include that value. So if x is less than or equal to 10, if we didn't put or equal to, it would be exclusive. So if x was 10, if x is 10 now, it would evaluate. Without that equal sign, it wouldn't evaluate. So then we'll put another else statement here. And we'll say x is greater than 1. Or greater than 0. But not less than 10. Or really, you could just say x is greater than 10. And so if I set x here equal to 5, then what's going to happen is it's going to run here, and then it's going to do whatever code is here, and then it's going to see this if statement, and it's going to evaluate it just like any other. It's going to do this code here, and then it's going to go, and because this if statement, this outer if statement evaluated to true, it's going to skip on. And now if this if statement evaluates to true, it's going to skip this, but not any of these, because it recognizes them as a different priority, and you can see that priority by the indentation. So it's a good way of keeping track. So here's this, x is between 1 and 10. If I set x equal to 15, then it's going to say x is greater than 10. And you can do this as many times as you want. Let's say if I wanted to do within this else statement, if I wanted to sort of copy this, right, and paste it here, and we'll say x less than or equal to 20, and we'll say x greater than 20. And now what you're effectively doing is just making things way more complicated than they should be. But let's see, we have some sort of parentheses error here. I didn't appear to copy the last parentheses. My bad. Or not parentheses, this bracket. That's what they're called. Another good way to tell us spacing it out, it adds codes, or it adds lines of code, adds extra lines to it, but unless you have a line requirement, it's a good way to keep track. So notice how this is triple indented compared to that. So see, x is greater than 10. Oh, whoops, I forgot to change that. Between, we'll say, 11 and 20. So x is greater than 10, and it's between 11 and 20. Or if I set it to 25 instead, it would say x is greater than 10, x is greater than 20. But if I had it set to less than 10 in the first place, if I set it back to 5, what's going to happen is it's going to evaluate this if statement, and because of that, it's going to skip this else statement and whatever's nested within it. So it's just going to say x is between 1 and 10. That should cover everything sort of basic with if and else statements. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below, at me on Teams, whatever. Just contact me and I'll answer. Thanks.